January 2026, Ghana's year-on-year inflation rate was 3.8%. Year-on-year inflation compares prices today with prices in the same month a year earlier. In plain terms, it tells us how much more or less expensive goods and services are now compared to January last year. The inflation rate of 3.8% therefore means that, on average, prices increased by 3.8% between January 2025 and January 2026. This 3.8% represents a 1.6 percentage point reduction from the 5.4% recorded in December 2025 and represents the 13th consecutive decline in inflation. It is also the lowest inflation rate since the CPI rebasing in 2021. Compared with inflation a year earlier, January 2025, inflation has fallen by 19.7 percentage points. On a month-on-month basis, which compares prices in January 2026 with prices in December 2025, inflation was 0.2%. This means prices increased by 0.2% between December 2025 and January 2026. Now let's break this down. Food inflation stood at 3.9% year-on-year, down from 4.9% in December 2025. Month-on-month, food prices rose by 1.1%, largely reflecting typical seasonal pressures at the start of the year. Non-food inflation also eased sharply, falling from 5.8% in December 2025 to 3.9% in January 2026. On a monthly basis, non-food prices actually declined by 0.4% between December 2025 and January 2026, helping to keep overall inflation low in the short term. Looking at goods versus services, inflation for goods slowed to 3.6% year-on-year, from 5.8% in December 2025, while services inflation eased to 4% from 4.5% in December 2025. Since goods make up nearly 3/4 of the CPI basket, this slowdown is especially important for households. For locally produced items, inflation fell from 5.9% in December 2025 to 4.5% in January 2026. Inflation on imported items declined even more sharply, from 4.3% to 2%, reflecting improved exchange rate stability and lower import cost pressures, among others. Now let's talk about regional inflation, because price changes are not the same everywhere. Inflation remains uneven across the country. The Northeast region recorded the highest year-on-year inflation at 11.2%, up from 9.8% in December 2025, while the Savannah region recorded the lowest at -2.6%, down from -1.2% in December 2025. On a month-on-month basis, the Northeast also recorded the highest increase, while the Western region recorded the lowest. These differences reflect variations in local supply conditions, transport costs, and market access. Turning to price drivers, a small number of items explain most of the inflation we see. The top 5 contributors to inflation, namely charcoal, green plantain, smoked herrings, cinema or cultural services, and ginger, together accounted for about 52% of overall inflation. Looking at inflation rates themselves, the top 5 highest inflation items, each recorded double-digit inflation, were ginger with inflation rate of 72.3%, green plantain with inflation rate of 67.9%, charcoal 53.7%, shrimps 48.8%, and cashew 47.2%. Altogether, these items contributed 33.4% to the overall inflation rate of 3.8%. At the same time, Some items recorded negative inflation, implying that their prices declined between January 2025 and January 2026. The bottom 5 low inflation items, namely garden eggs with inflation rate of negative 58.7%, fried fish, negative 50.7%, cocoyam leaves or contomere, negative 49.1%, pawpaw, negative 46.9%, and fresh tomatoes, negative 42.5%, altogether dragged inflation down by 24.2%. In summary, the key drivers of inflation in January 2025 were moderate food price increases, declining non-food prices, lower goods inflation, and improved imported price dynamics, alongside persistent regional differences. So what does this mean in practical terms? For government, the message is clear. Stay the course on fiscal discipline. Continue efforts to stabilize food prices and invest in storage, irrigation, transport, and market access to reduce regional price gaps. For businesses, easing inflation creates room to invest in efficiency, strengthen local supply chains, reduce unnecessary costs, and pass on savings to consumers through more stable prices. For households, this is a good time to plan budgets with greater confidence. Track spending on essentials like food, rent, and school fees, and avoid non-essential expenses where possible, and try to save, even if small amounts, to strengthen household finances. Before I close, let me express our sincere appreciation to market players, market readers, the media, and all our data providers whose cooperation.
Thank you too. But that is not so necessary to us. So interesting things that he said about the drivers of inflation, and I can see their pictures here. I see green plantain, charcoal, smoked herrings, and I think he added ginger and cashew. They are some of the biggest contributors to what we are seeing. So, according to him, that's over 50% of the inflation rate was. So they were pushing the inflation rate up.
Yeah.
Those things, smoked herrings. I see charcoal, green plantain, ginger, cashew, and cinnamon. I had cinnamon here. I'm surprised. Anyway, so those are, and then there were some other goods that actually recorded negative figures when it comes to, and tomato is one of them. Garden eggs is also one of them. Contomere is another. So very interesting dynamics that we are seeing. Just before we speak to Prof. Nancy, you have a few highlights of what the government statistician said.
So, for instance, he noted that prices increased by 0.2% between December 2025 and January 2026, showing that short-term price pressures remain low. Then Ghana's inflation fell to 3.8% in January 2026, and this means that on average, prices were 3.8% higher in January 2026 than a year earlier, down from 5.4% in December 2025 and 23.5% in January 2025, making the 13th consecutive month of decline. Then he also noted that January 2026 inflation outcome was driven by moderate food price increases, declining non-food prices, slowing goods inflation, and easing imported price pressures. So some of the things they noted. For instance, it says that food inflation eased to 3.9% in January 2026 from 4.9% in December 2025, while non-food prices fell by 0.4% over the months. This helped keep inflation low.
In fact, food prices, the inflationary rate was 1.1% month by month. So if you're measuring from December to January, we are saying that food prices generally increased by only 1.1%.
Yeah.
Let's speak to Professor Franklin Mabe. Prof is an economist. Specifically, he's an agric economist with the University of Development Studies. Prof, thank you very much for your time and good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning.